The corvo landed on her shoulder before she even understood what was happening. One moment Lyra had been standing at the edge of the ceremonial courtyard, pressed against the stone wall with the other servants in stable hands, watching the great binding ceremony from a distance that felt appropriate for someone of her station. The next moment, the sky above the gathered court darkened with the beating of enormous black wings, and every single person in the courtyard fell silent with a collective intake of breath that Lyra felt more than heard. The black raven of Ashenvale, the creature that legends said carried the soul of the pack within its feathers, the bird that had not moved of its own accord during a ceremony in over 300 years, was in flight. It circled once above the sacred dais where King Kale stood in his formal blacks, his jaw set and his silver eyes fixed straight ahead as if he could refuse to acknowledge what was happening by sheer force of will. It circled twice, and the silence in the courtyard became something physical, something that pressed against Lyra's chest and made it difficult to breathe. On the third circle, it dove. It did not dive toward the king. It did not return to its obsidian perch beside the throne, where it had sat motionless for as long as anyone could remember. It dove toward the far edge of the courtyard, toward the stone wall where the servants stood, and Lyra had just enough time to register the blur of black. Feathers before the weight of it settled onto her left shoulder, and she felt, impossibly, the cool press of metal being placed into her open right hand, which she had not consciously raised, but which was there, palm up, waiting, as if her body had known before her mind could object. She looked down at what rested in her palm, the sovereignty ring of Ashenvale, the band of black iron set with a single dark stone that pulsed with a light that was not quite silver and not quite gold, but something between the two, something ancient, something alive. The ring that had been on King Kale's finger 30 seconds ago. The silence in the courtyard lasted exactly 3 more seconds. Then it shattered into chaos. "Seize her." The voice that cut through the noise was not the king's. It was Lady Vivian Ashford who spoke first, her tone controlled and precise, her pale eyes fixed on Lyra with an expression that was perfectly composed and absolutely arctic. She stood beside the empty space on the dais where the king had been before he descended the steps, with a speed that did not match the careful stillness of his face. "That girl stole the ring. I watched her do it. Someone seize her immediately before she runs." "No one stole anything." The king's voice was quieter than Vivian's, but it carried. It always carried. Lyra had heard it only twice before in her life. Once when he had ridden through the lower district during a border inspection, and once when he had passed through the stables where she worked without looking at her. Now he was looking at her. She would have preferred the not looking. His silver eyes held an expression she could not read, and the inability to read it frightened her more than the chaos around her did. "Everyone stand down, now." The courtyard obeyed. It always obeyed. That was the thing about King Kale of Ashenvale, that every person in the kingdom understood from childhood, that his authority was not performed, but inhabited, that when he said a thing it became the shape of reality, and you simply adjusted yourself to fit inside it. The noise stopped. The guards who had taken steps toward Lyra stopped. Even Vivian Ashford went still, though the expression on her face remained exactly what it had been, controlled and cold, and absolutely focused on the woman with a raven on her shoulder and a ring in her hand. Lyra realized she was shaking. She had not noticed it until the silence fell again, but now she could feel it in her hands and her knees and somewhere deep in her chest, a fine trembling that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the energy that was moving through her, something she did not have a name for, something that felt like standing in a thunderstorm and being the tallest point on an open plain. The raven on her shoulder made a low sound, not a caw, but something softer, almost conversational, and turned its head to regard the king with one glossy black eye. "What is your name?" the king said. He was standing 6 feet from her now. She had not seen him cross the distance. He moved like something that had never needed to announce itself. "Lyra," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Lyra Voss. I work in the Eastern Stables, Your Majesty. I did not take the ring. I would never." She opened her palm and extended her hand toward him. "Please take it back. I do not know why it did this. I do not know why it keeps doing things like this. The animals, I mean. They always. I am sorry. Please just take it back." He looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. He looked at the ring, which was still pulsing with that strange, not silver, not gold light. He looked at the raven, which showed absolutely no intention of leaving her shoulder. Then he looked at her face, and whatever he found there made something shift behind his eyes. Something small and carefully controlled, but she saw it, just for a moment, before his expression closed again like a door. "The ring does not go back," he said quietly, so quietly that only she could hear it. "That is not how the old law works. You know what this means." "No," she said honestly. "I do not know anything about the old law. I am a stable hand, Your Majesty. I clean stalls and I treat wounds and I sometimes talk to horses when no one is watching because they seem to appreciate it. I do not know what any of this means." Something crossed his face that might, on a different person, have been the beginning of a smile. It was gone before she could be certain. "Then someone will explain it to you," he said. He turned to the assembled court, to the nobles and guards and witnesses who were watching with various degrees of shock and calculation, and, in at least one case, barely contained fury. "The binding ceremony is suspended pending an inquiry. The raven has acted. The old law applies. Everyone will return to their quarters." His gaze moved once to Lady Vivian Ashford, and in that look passed something that Lyra could not interpret, something complicated and loaded with history she was not privy to. "All guests will be treated with every courtesy while the inquiry proceeds." Vivian said nothing. She did not need to. Her silence said everything with perfect articulation. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. Lyra spent her first night in a room that was larger than the entire building where she had lived for the past 6 years. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ring, which she had not been able to give back because the raven had made a sound of profound objection every time she tried to set it down, and thought about the specific flavor of disaster that her life had become. The raven had settled on the windowsill, appearing to sleep, though she suspected it was watching her with more attention than it let on. "I know you are not sleeping," she told it. It cracked one eye open and regarded her with the particular expression she had come to associate with creatures who found humans simultaneously endearing and exhausting. "What did you do? Do you understand what you did? There was a ceremony happening. There was a very important woman standing there who was about to become queen, and you just took the ring and brought it to me like I was the solution to some problem I did not know existed. I clean stalls. I talk to horses. That is my life. That was my life." She paused. "That was a good life. I would like it back." The raven made a soft sound that communicated, with remarkable clarity, that her preferences on the matter were noted and considered irrelevant. She had grown up with this. The certainty of animals, the way they moved toward her or stayed near her or brought her things, the way injured creatures sometimes found her on the road, as if they had been given directions. Her father, before he died, had told her it was a gift. Her neighbors, less charitably, had called it unsettling. The stable master who employed her had called it useful, and had never questioned it beyond that, which had suited Lyra perfectly well. Usefulness was safe. Usefulness was manageable. Being the woman the king's sacred raven chose in front of the entire court during the most politically significant ceremony of the decade was something else entirely. She thought about Lady Vivian Ashford's face, that perfect, controlled face with its pale eyes and the single, Moment when those eyes had landed on Lyra with the full weight of her attention, and Lyra had felt, in her animal-trained instincts, the way she felt when something large and predatory was deciding whether the hunt was worth the effort. That woman is going to try to remove me, she thought. Not because she hates me, because I am an obstacle. It is nothing personal. That almost made it worse. She closed her fingers around the ring. The pulse of it moved through her hand and up her arm and settled. Somewhere near her sternum, warm and steady as a heartbeat that was not quite hers. The knock at her door came before sunrise. She had not slept. She opened the door to find not a servant, but the king's personal steward, an older man named Aldrich, whose expression managed to convey both professional neutrality and deep personal discomfort at the situation. "His Majesty will see you now," he said, "if you would follow me." "It is not yet dawn," she said. "No," he agreed. "It is not." She followed. Him through corridors of dark stone and burning torchlight, to a room that was not the throne room, and not a formal receiving chamber, but something in between. A working space lined with maps and correspondence, and the particular organized chaos of a person who does not stop thinking long enough to sleep. King Kyle was standing at a window with his back to her, and he was not wearing his formal blacks, but something simpler, dark trousers and a shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and the difference between this and what he had been wearing during the ceremony was disorienting in a way she could not quite articulate. He looked, in this light, like a person, rather than an institution. "You did not sleep," he said, without turning around. It was not a question. "No," she said. "Did you?" The pause before he answered was brief, but she caught it. "Sit down, Miss Voss." She sat. He turned from the window and came to the chair across from her, and in the firelight she had the opportunity to actually look at him rather than stare at him the way one stares at something that has become a problem. He was not old, not as she had somehow imagined from a distance, perhaps 10 years her senior, with the kind of face that had been made handsome, and then made harder by whatever his particular life had required of it. The silver eyes she had noticed in the courtyard were, up close, not silver exactly, but a pale gray shot through with something that caught the light differently, depending on the angle, and they were fixed on her now, with an attention that she was learning was simply how he looked at things, fully, without apology for the intensity of it. "The old law of the raven binding," he said, setting his hands flat on the desk between them in a gesture she read as deliberate, as if he were choosing careful neutrality, "has not been invoked in 312 years. Most of the court considers it ceremonial at this point, a tradition, a symbol. The raven sits on its perch, the ceremony proceeds, and everyone goes home. This is what has happened for 3 centuries. He looked at her steadily. What happened yesterday was not that. "I understand," she said. "I did not ask for it." "I know. That is actually relevant." He leaned back slightly. "The Raven of Ashenvale is bound to the bloodline of the kingdom, to its essential nature. The old texts describe it as the spirit of the pack given feathers, the part of us that knows what we are at our core rather than what we have decided to be. When it acts independently, when it makes a choice that overrides the ceremony, the law says that choice must be honored and investigated. It cannot simply be set aside." Another pause. "It has never, in the recorded history of this kingdom, brought the ring to a stable hand." "I imagine not," she said. "What it has done, in the few documented cases, is identify someone of hidden or suppressed lineage who has a claim to the bond seat. Someone who should have been at the ceremony but was not, for reasons of politics or secrecy or deliberate erasure." His eyes did not leave hers. "I am going to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, even if the honest answer is that you do not know, because not knowing is useful information. Do you have any knowledge of your family's history beyond your father's generation?" Lyra was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, The sky was beginning to go from black to the particular dark blue. That preceded dawn, and the room felt suspended in time, held between one thing and another. "My father never spoke of his parents," she said carefully. "He came to Ashenvale from somewhere further north when I was very young. He was a healer. He knew things about plants and wounds and fever that other healers did not, and sometimes people asked him where he had learned it, and he would smile and say that some knowledge is older than schools. He died when I was 12. He did not leave papers." She paused. "He did leave one thing. A small carved token on a cord. I have worn it since I was small. He told me to keep it close and to never show it to anyone who worked for the crown." The king's expression changed. Slightly, carefully, but it changed. "Show me," he said. She hesitated. The habit of 12 years of obedience to her father's last instruction was not a small thing. But her father was dead, and the king was here, and the raven had put a ring in her hand in front of the entire court, and the particular shape of this moment felt like a door that could only be opened in one direction. She reached beneath the collar of her shirt and drew out the cord and the token that hung from it. A piece of dark wood no larger than her thumb, carved into a shape that she had always assumed was a bird, but which she now, looking at it in the firelight across from the most powerful man in the kingdom, recognized with a cold clarity, was a raven. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. When he did speak, his voice was different in some way she could not categorize. Not softer exactly, but more careful, as if he were handling something that could break. "Where did your father say he came from?" "He said north," she said. "He said the north is full of old things that the south has forgotten, and that forgetting is sometimes how people survive. The northern territories were cleared 300 years ago," he said. "The bloodline that held them was scattered. They had..." He stopped. He looked at the token again. "They had a mark, a family mark. They were the raven keepers, the ones who kept the bond between the raven and the crown." He lifted his eyes to hers, and in them was something that she could only describe as the look of a man who has just had the architecture of his world rearranged by 3 words. "Your father's family name, before he came south." "I do not know," she said honestly. "I think you do," he said quietly. "I think you have been not knowing it your whole life because that was how you survived." He rose from his chair and moved to a cabinet against the wall, and returned with a book so old its spine had been repaired twice, and its pages had the yellow of things that have been waiting a long time. He opened it to a page near the center and turned it to face her. It showed a family crest, a raven in flight above a stylized flame, and below the crest a family name in old lettering that she had to read twice before it resolved into something familiar. Voss. Her own name. She had been using her own name her entire life and had not known what it meant. "That is," she started. "Yes," he said. "My name." "Yes." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of 300 years of a story she had not known she was living inside of, and the particular vertigo of understanding that everything you thought was random was in fact a pattern, and you were the center of it, and you had been the center of it all, along without knowing. The raven token on its cord was warm against her sternum, and the ring in her pocket was pulsing with that steady, not silver, not gold light, and the room smelled of old paper and wood smoke, and something cool and pine sharp that she was beginning to associate with him. "What does this mean?" she said. It came out very flat and very calm, in a way that communicated the exact opposite of flat and calm. "It means," he said, with the careful precision of a man choosing each word, like a tool from a rack, that the old law is not merely ceremonial. The raven binding is real. The bloodline of the raven keepers has a legal claim to the bond seat that predates every political arrangement currently in place. He paused. "It means that Lady Vivian Ashford's claim, while legitimate by modern law, is challenged by an older claim. One that the law requires me to investigate before proceeding. Another pause. Longer. It means that for the duration of the inquiry, you will remain in the palace under my protection. I do not need protection, she said, and then thought of Lady Vivian's pale eyes and the feeling of something large and predatory deciding if the hunt was worth the effort. I may need a small amount of protection, she revised. This time there was no almost smile. It was brief and controlled and quickly suppressed, but it was real, and it changed his face in a way that made her suddenly very aware of the distance between them, or rather of the lack of it, of the fact that they were sitting at a relatively small desk in a firelit room before dawn, and he was looking at her the way he looked at things, fully and without apology. You will have it, he said. Whatever else happens, you will have that. She left the meeting with more questions than she had arrived with, and the distinct impression that King Cale of Ashenvale was a man accustomed to certainty, who had just been introduced to its absence. She recognized it because she was doing the same thing. The palace by day was full of people and movement, and the specific social choreography of a place where power was a currency that everyone was constantly spending and earning, and she was new to it, and obvious about her newness. Servants looked at her with curiosity, nobles with varying degrees of calculation, and she navigated the corridors with the same calm deliberateness she used when moving through a pen of nervous animals. No sudden movements, no shows of either fear or aggression, steady and present and unthreatening. She found the stables before she found breakfast. This was not entirely surprising. The smell of hay and horse and the particular warm living scent of large animals at rest had been the backdrop of her entire adult life, and she moved toward it the way other people move toward familiar music, recognizing it as something that belonged to her. The palace stables were on an entirely different scale from the eastern stables where she worked. 3. Long buildings of gray stone housing animals that were worth more than the entire district she lived in, and they were staffed by a small army of grooms and handlers who looked up when she walked in with the careful blankness of people who had heard about yesterday and were not sure what to make of it. There was a horse at the far end of the first stable that was giving everyone trouble. She could tell by the way it was being given a wide berth, the way the grooms angled around its stall while pretending this was simply the natural direction of their paths. She walked to it without thinking, and looked over the stall door at a black stallion that was in genuine distress, sweating and circling and tossing its head with the unfocused anxiety of an animal that could not name the source of its discomfort. She reached over the door and said nothing, just held her hand out flat in the particular patient way she had developed over years, not demanding anything, just being present and available. The horse stopped circling. It turned its head toward her hand with the slow caution of something that has been hurt before and has not yet decided whether this is safe. She waited. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Then the horse took one step toward her hand, and another, and pressed its nose against her palm with a shuddering exhale that was almost a sigh. He has not let anyone near him in 3 days. The voice came from behind her, and she turned to find a man leaning against the opposite wall of the stable who had not been there when she arrived, or rather, who had been there and whom she had not noticed, which was not the same thing. He was perhaps her age, perhaps a few years younger, with the kind of easy physical grace that came from a life spent outdoors, and he was watching her with an expression of open curiosity that was so different from the careful watching she had been receiving since yesterday that she almost laughed. The stablemaster has been quietly panicking. That horse belongs to the king. Something frightened him, she said, keeping her hand steady as the stallion investigated her with increasing confidence. Not recently, a while ago. He has been waiting for it to happen again ever since. She paused. Some animals are like that. They learn fear faster than they learn safety. Some people are like that too, the man said. He pushed off the wall and came to stand beside her, not crowding the horse but present. A comfortable amount of presence. You are Lyra Voss. I am Corwin. I am the king's second. which means I am his chief of investigation, which means this inquiry, officially, belongs to me. He did not say this with the self-importance she might have expected. He said it the way he might say that the weather today was likely to be overcast, as simply a fact about the world. I have been asked to be very thorough. I intend to be very thorough. I thought it might be less unpleasant for both of us if I introduced myself. Before I began being thorough at you, I appreciate the warning, she said. I also thought, he continued, that you might want someone on your side who is not politically motivated. Everything in this palace is politically motivated right now. The inquiry is politically motivated. Lady Vivian is conducting her own inquiry, which is also politically motivated. The king himself is trying not to be politically motivated, which is its own form of political motivation. He paused. I am genuinely just trying to find out what is true. That puts me in an unusual position in this palace at this particular moment, and I thought we might be useful to each other. She looked at him steadily. He had an honest face, which she did not entirely trust, because she had met enough animals that wore honest faces while planning something inadvisable. But he had also stood at an angle to the horse that a person who did not know animals would not have known to choose, a non-confrontational angle. The angle of someone who had spent time learning how to be safe to something skittish, and that she trusted more than faces. What do you want to know? She said. Everything, he said cheerfully. But we can start with your father. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. She told him what she had told the king, and a little more, because Corwin's method of inquiry was not the king's careful deliberateness, but something more like letting a river run and following where it went, asking questions that led to other questions in a way that made her say things she had not planned to say. Small memories of her father that she had kept private, the way he sometimes touched the northern-facing wall of their house in a certain way before sleeping, the particular herbs he used for wounds that she had never seen written in any healer's guide, the song he had sung to her when she was small, that she now, hearing herself describe it to Corwin, recognized might not have been a lullaby, but something older, something ceremonial, something in a language she did not know, but had memorized phonetically without understanding. Corwin wrote things down in a small book with complete and focused attention, and when she finished, he sat quietly for a moment in the way of someone whose internal workings were moving very quickly behind a still face. The song, he said. Can you sing a piece of it? She hummed a few bars, low, the first phrase of it, and watched his expression change. That is the Raven Keeper's oath, he said, sung at investiture. Your father taught it to you as a children's song. He was hiding it in plain sight, hiding it in you, making sure you carried it without knowing you were carrying it, in case you needed it, and he was not there to give it to you. He paused. Your father knew something was coming. He prepared you for it. He was afraid, she said. It was not a question. He was careful, Corwin said, which was a kinder word for the same thing. Whatever he survived in the north, he understood that visibility was dangerous. He made himself ordinary so thoroughly that his own daughter grew up not knowing she was anything else. He closed his notebook. Ordinary is no longer an option for you. There are people in this palace who find your visibility very inconvenient. I know, she said. I have met Lady Vivian's eyes. That woman, Corwin said, has been working toward this match for 3 years. She has political alliances, financial agreements, and a frankly terrifying amount of social capital invested in becoming queen. A stable hand with an ancestral claim and a talking raven is not part of her plan. He paused. I am not saying she would do something illegal. You are absolutely implying she would do something that exists in a gray area adjacent to illegal, Lyra said. I would never imply such a thing about a lady of her standing, he said, with complete insincerity. She spent the afternoon learning the palace and being learned by it, reading the territory and letting the territory read her, noting exits and sight lines, and the particular social topography of who stood where and watched whom. The raven reappeared at the midday hour and settled on her shoulder with the casual entitlement of a creature that had never considered that this might not be acceptable, and she found, to her own surprise, that she did not mind it. It was warm and solid and smelled of old, forest and something electric, and when it occasionally made soft sounds near her ear, she had the impression that it was narrating the world to her in a language she almost understood. She was crossing the inner garden when Lady Vivian found her. Or rather, when Lady Vivian arranged for Lyra to come to her, which was different, though the difference was invisible from the outside. One of Vivian's attendants materialized at Lyra's elbow with a politely worded invitation to take tea, and Lyra thought of what Corwin had said about gray areas and calculated that refusing would be worse than accepting. So she followed the attendant to a garden alcove where Lady Vivian was seated with the composed elegance of someone who had never in her life been anything other than entirely in control of any room she occupied. She was beautiful in the curated and deliberate way of someone who understood beauty as a tool and maintained it as such. Her pale eyes were light blue, her dark hair arranged with precision, and she looked at Lyra with an expression that was gracious and warm and absolutely evaluative. "Sit down," she said. And there was a layer under the warmth, a layer that said, "I am choosing to be gracious, and you would do well to notice that it is a choice." Lyra sat. "I have asked to speak with you informally because I believe that informal honesty is more productive than formal posturing at this stage. We are both women of intelligence, and I think we can speak plainly to each other." She poured tea with the ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. "You did not plan this. I believe that. You seem genuinely bewildered by what happened, and bewilderment is not something most people can perform convincingly. You are not a schemer." "Thank you," Lyra said, deciding to accept this as a compliment. "However," Vivian continued, and her voice did not change, but the space in the garden changed around it, became more precise and cooler. "You are now in a position where schemers will scheme around you whether or not you wish it. People will use you. They will attach their ambitions to your situation. They will offer you things that seem like gifts and are actually chains. I want to be one of the honest ones, one of the people who tells you clearly what they want, so that you can make a clear decision." She lifted her teacup. "I want you to step back." "From what?" Lyra said carefully. "From the inquiry. From the claim. From whatever ancient law Corwin is researching in the archives at this moment, because I know he is researching it, and I know what he will find." Vivian's pale eyes were steady and direct, and in them Lyra could see something that was not cruelty, but was its sophisticated cousin, the ability to see people as pieces on a board and to move them without personal feeling. "I am not asking you to disappear. I am asking you to tell the king that you do not wish to pursue the claim, that you are grateful for the inquiry, but you choose your life as it was. Return to the stables. Live quietly. You will be well compensated. I will see to it personally, and you will be safe." A small pause. "You will also avoid becoming something much more complicated than a stable hand." Lyra looked at her tea. She looked at the raven on her shoulder, which was looking at Lady Vivian with an expression she would have described, in any other bird, as contemptuous. She looked at her own hands, at the ring she was still carrying because she did not know what else to do with it, the one that pulsed with its steady old light. She thought about her father and his carefully chosen ordinary life, his lullabies that were oaths, his name that was his whole history shrunk to 4 unremarkable letters. She thought about what it meant to hide inside your own inheritance your entire life. She thought about whether she was capable of choosing to do that deliberately, knowingly, with clear eyes. She thought she might not be. She was not entirely sure, but she knew that whatever she chose, she did not want to choose it, because a woman with pale eyes and a cultivated warmth had asked her to, in a garden, over tea, in a way that was careful enough to be almost invisible as a threat. "I appreciate your honesty," Lyra said, setting down her teacup. "I will consider it." Vivian's expression did not flicker. "Of course," she said. "Take the time you need." The time Lyra needed turned out to be approximately 3 hours, at the end of which she went to find Corwin and told him what had been said in the garden. He listened with the expression of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed, wrote something in his notebook, and then told her that his research had found a provision in the old law that she needed to know about. The raven binding, he explained, was not simply a symbolic gesture. In the old legal code, which had never formally been struck from the books, because 300 years of it being purely ceremonial had made everyone forget it was still technically enforceable. The bond seat was not the queen's seat, but the raven keeper's seat. The seat of the one who maintained the connection between the pack and its sovereign nature, between the king and what he was at the most fundamental level. The raven keeper was not a consort. The raven keeper was, in the old language, something closer to an anchor. "And if there is a raven keeper," she said slowly, "then any other arrangement is legally irregular," Corwin said, with diplomatic precision. "At best. And Lady Vivian knows this," she said. "Lady Vivian has very good lawyers," he confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the archive window, the sky was going orange and deep blue with the beginning of evening, and the palace grounds were settling into their later rhythms, guards changing, lamps being lit, the particular hush of a place preparing for night. The raven on her shoulder stirred and made a sound that was almost like a word. "What? Does the king know?" she said. "Everything I know," Corwin said. "I report to him first." "And what has he said?" Corwin was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with the care of someone navigating between loyalty and honesty, between his duty to his king and his intention to be straight with her. "He has said that the law will be followed, all of it, and that no one will be pressured into a choice that should be freely made." He paused. "He has also been in his private study for 4 hours, working through every record we have of the Northern Territories." Another pause. "He does not do that for things he intends to dismiss." She thought about the room before dawn, the maps and correspondence, the rolled sleeves, the not-quite smile. She thought about the way he had looked at the token on her cord, as if it were something he had been looking for, a piece of something larger that had been missing for 300 years. She thought about the way he had said, "You will have that," with the particular quality of a promise that did not need to be elaborate to be absolute. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the token and beneath it, the steady rhythm of her own heart, and thought, "My father taught me his oath as a lullaby. He put his whole heritage inside a child, and trusted that when the time came, she would know what to do with it." She had not yet decided if she trusted herself with that faith, but she was beginning to think she owed it to him to try. The second day brought complications in the shape of a formal challenge. Lady Vivian's legal team, moving with a speed that suggested this had been prepared in advance against the possibility of exactly this contingency, submitted to the court a formal objection to the inquiry on the grounds that the ancestral law, while not struck from the books, had been superseded in practical application by 3 centuries of unbroken conventional practice. It was a sound argument, made by people who were very good at sound arguments. The court would need to convene a panel to assess it. This would take, conservatively, 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Vivian's position as the primary candidate for the bond seat would be maintained as status quo. Lyra received this information from Corwin over breakfast, and ate her eggs with the careful calm of someone who is actively refusing to feel what she is feeling. The raven ate a piece of bread crust off the corner of her plate, and then looked at her with an expression she had begun to interpret as expectant. "I know," she told it. "I am thinking." The challenge is not necessarily a problem, Corwin said, refilling her tea with the easy manner of someone who had decided they were friends and was proceeding on that basis. A panel review means official record. Everything goes on paper. Lady Vivienne is counting on the panel to rule in her favor, which they may well do. 3 weeks of conventional practice is a compelling argument. But the review also means that your lineage has to be formally established in the record, which means the Northern Territories' records have to be opened, which means things that have been buried for 300 years become official and public. He sipped his tea. Some of those things are about why the Raven Keepers were scattered in the first place, and those are things that certain families in this court would prefer to remain buried. Including Vivienne's family? She said. He smiled. Including several. Families whose current standing would look considerably different in light of certain 300-year-old decisions. He set down his cup. The king knows this. He has known it since last night. He is navigating the politics of it very carefully. He is always navigating something very carefully, she said, and heard something in her own voice that she examined and then set aside to look at later. She spent the morning in the stables, the one place in the palace where she knew who she was. And what she was doing. She was brushing Ash with the long, even strokes that he found calming when she heard the door, and turned to find the king standing at the entrance with the expression of a man who has come somewhere deliberately, but is now uncertain of the particular physics of what he intended. She had not expected him here. She was in her stable clothes, the simple worn things she actually worked in, and she had hay in her hair and the particular smell of horses about her, and she was suddenly and acutely aware of both of these things in a way she found intensely annoying. She turned back to the horse and kept brushing, partly because it was the right thing to do for the horse, and partly because looking at him directly felt like too much information to process at once. "Your Majesty," she said. "He is better," Kyle said. He had come into the stable and was standing 3 feet from her, and she could feel the focus of his attention the way she could sometimes feel an approaching weather system, something in the air pressure. "Corwin told me you had been in here. I did not realize the degree of improvement." He paused. "I have had 3 specialists look at him this month. They were probably trying too hard," she said. "Some things do not get better because you try harder at them. They get better because you stop trying and just stay." She felt the pause before his response as something physical. "I have found that to be true of some things," he said, "and entirely wrong about others. I have not always been good at knowing which is which." She turned then and looked at him, because there was something in his voice that required looking at. He was watching the horse, and the horse, with the instinctive social intelligence of a prey animal, was watching him back with steady, large eyes that held no fear and a great deal of careful assessment. She had the strange feeling of being outside a conversation that was happening between 2 creatures who were recognizing something in each other. And then the king looked at her, and the feeling resolved into something more ordinary and more complicated at the same time. "I owe you information," he said. Not as a king explaining a situation to a subject, but as one person to another who has been put in a position neither of them chose. He moved to stand beside her at the stall door, not close enough to be inappropriate, close enough to be present. "My arrangement with Lady Vivienne was political. Correct and rational and useful in all the ways that political arrangements are useful. I respected her intelligence, and I believed she would be an effective partner in governance. I did not." He paused, and she had the impression that he was choosing with great precision between what was true and what he would normally say, and choosing the true thing. "I did not feel the bond. I had begun to believe that I was simply not a person who would feel it, that it was not something available to me, that some people are built that way." She was quiet. The horse made a soft sound and shifted his weight, and the stable smelled of hay and leather and that cool pine thing that she was done pretending she did not notice. "And now?" she said, which was either a brave question or a reckless one, and she could not currently tell which. He looked at her for a long moment. His gray shot-through eyes were very steady. Now I am in the middle of a legal inquiry that is going to take 3 weeks minimum, and that I am not going to allow to be influenced by anything other than the evidence, he said carefully. Now I am trying very hard to do the right thing in the right order. Another pause. I am telling you this so that you know the inquiry is not the only thing happening, and so that you know I am aware of that, and so that you can make whatever choices you make with accurate information. It was not a declaration. It was not an advance. It was a careful and honest man telling her, in the most precise language available to him, something that he had clearly decided she had the right to know. She thought about Lady Vivian saying, "I want to be one of the honest ones." She thought about the difference between honesty that is a tactic and honesty that is simply how a person is built. She thought it was becoming clearer to her which kind this was. "Thank you," she said, matching his carefulness with her own. "I will make my choices with accurate information." He nodded once. He looked at the horse again. The horse who was watching him with those calm, large eyes. "What is his name?" he said. "I have been calling him Ash," she said. "I did not know if he had one." "He does not," the king said. "He has been here for 6 months, and we have not managed to get close enough to name him." He looked at the horse, who was now leaning very slightly toward Lyra's shoulder. "Ash is good," he said quietly. "If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on." 3 weeks was a long time to inhabit a space between one life and another. Lyra learned the palace the way she had learned every place she had ever worked, by moving through it slowly and paying attention to what moved through it in return. The inquiry in the formal records room created pressure, and she watched how people responded to it. Some nobles whose families had been present 300 years ago moved through the corridors with the deliberateness of people, recalculating. Some of Vivian's allies quietly inserted distance between themselves and her position. Vivian herself moved through all of it with the magnificent composure of a woman who had decided that if she was going to lose, she was going to do it so elegantly that it would not look like losing. She told Corwin about Vivian's discipline, the way she existed in the same spaces with perfect, cool composure, never unkind and never hostile, losing something she had built 3 years of her life toward, and doing it without flinching. "She is formidable," he agreed. "She is also not a good person in several ways I have documented. These things are not mutually exclusive." He paused. "She sent someone to look into your background. I intercepted most of it." "Most," Lyra noted. "The things they found are not actionable," he said. "You are exactly who you appear to be. A stable hand with an extraordinarily improbable ancestral claim and an unusual relationship with animals. There is nothing there that can be used against you." He paused. She also made an approach to 2 panel members. "I am not saying she bribed them. I am saying she had long social conversations with them and sent them extremely nice wine afterward." "Of course she did," Lyra said. "The king is aware," Corwin said. He replaced them with 2 others. The inquiry also meant that she spent a great deal of time in the archives, which Corwin had decreed was necessary for her education in her own history, and which she found, despite herself, to be increasingly absorbing. The records of the Northern Territories were not a story of erasure exactly, but of suppression, of a community of people who had maintained something old and essential being methodically made invisible over 3 centuries, their land reassigned, their records misfiled, their name gradually removed from the official histories until they existed only in footnotes and the kind of legal documents that no one reads unless they are specifically looking. Her father's family had been the last of the Ravenkeeper line, and they had understood what was happening and had done what people do when they understand that survival requires becoming unrecognizable. They had scattered. They had taken ordinary names and ordinary lives, and they had kept the old things, the tokens and songs and small secret inheritances, in hopes that someday the world would be different enough for them to matter again. She sat in the archive one afternoon with a manuscript spread before her and read her family's history for the first time. She read about what the Raven Keepers had been, the bridge between the pack's wild nature and its civilized governance, the ones who could hear what animals said and translate it into something the court could use. She read about the last investiture and what had happened after it, and understood that her father's caution had not been paranoia, but informed historical awareness, that the forces that had scattered her family were still present in the current court, wearing different names and newer clothes. She was still sitting with this when the door opened, and the king came in, which he had done several times in the past 2 weeks, always late in the day, always after Corwin had gone. He came to the table and looked at what she was reading. Then the raven made a sound she had not heard it make before, soft and low and somehow satisfied, and moved to the window and sat there with its back to them, with the pointed serenity of a creature that has decided it is not needed for the next part. "The panel convenes tomorrow," he said, sitting across from her in the chair that had become, over the past 2 weeks, his chair in the way that things become yours when you use them enough. "They will deliver a preliminary finding within 4 days. And if they find in Vivian's favor," she said, "then we take it to the full court review," he said, "which takes longer but has a broader scope of authority." He paused. "I want you to know that I will not let this be decided by pressure or by 3-panel arguments or by nice wine sent to the right people. This will be decided by the law. All of it. The whole of it." She looked at him across the table, and the manuscript spread between them and the particular quality of the evening light coming through the archive windows, and she said, because it was true, and because she had decided sometime in the past week that being honest with him was both the right thing to do and the only thing she was actually capable of. "I am not afraid of what the law finds. I am afraid of what I want." She paused. "I am afraid of wanting things I was not raised to think I was allowed to want. Things that feel too large for the person I have always been." He was very still. In the evening light, his face was serious, and the gray of his eyes was deep. "You are not too small for anything that is yours by right," he said. "Rights and feelings are different things," she said. "Yes," he said. "They are." He reached across the table, not to her hand, but close to it, close enough that it was a question rather than an answer. But in this particular case, they happened to be pointing in the same direction. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She looked at the raven on the window, who was still ostentatiously facing the other way, and thought that for an animal that had orchestrated this entire situation, it was displaying remarkable restraint and not gloating about it. Then she turned her hand over. He looked at her hand for a moment with an expression that she had learned to read by now, the one where he was allowing himself to feel something he would normally not permit, the one that meant the careful management of himself was momentarily suspended. Then he covered her hand with his, and the warmth of it moved up her arm and settled in her chest beside the warmth of the token and the pulse of the ring. And something older than all of it, something that she had been carrying without a name since she was a child, talking to horses and birds and the particular creatures of the world that saw her and came. And she understood with a clarity that was almost physical that this was what her father had been preparing her for. Not the legal claim, not the inquiry, but this. The being seen, the being wanted, the understanding that she had always been worth coming to, that the animals had known it all along, and that now a king knew it too. They sat like that in the archive until the light went entirely and someone had to light a lamp. They talked about things that had nothing to do with the inquiry, about horses and the specific humor of ravens and the way the northern territories had looked, from the old records' descriptions, like a landscape of deep forests and cold rivers that sounded like nothing she had ever seen. He had not seen them either, these 300-year-old lands that were part of his kingdom's history. He talked about them the way she talked about the parts of her father's story she had never been told, with the specific longing of someone who has a missing piece and has only recently begun to understand the shape of the absence. She thought, "We are both, in different ways, people who grew up with gaps in the story." She thought, that might be why this feels the way it does. The panel convened the next morning. Lyra sat in the observation section with Corwin, who wore his most official coat and was affecting the complete calm of a man who had done his research and trusted it. When Vivian caught Lyra's eye across the chamber, she held it for precisely 3 seconds before looking away. And in those 3 seconds, Lyra saw something she had not expected. Not cruelty and not contempt, but something more complicated. Recognition. One woman seeing another and understanding that they were not, at the fundamental level, so different in what they had been, doing with their lives. She did not forgive Vivian for the wine sent to panel members or the investigators sent to dig through her past. But she understood her. That was different. The panel deliberated for 3 days. In those 3 days, Lyra continued to work with Ash in the stables because the horse needed her and because she needed the stables. She taught 2 of the younger stable hands the patient handout method for approaching anxious animals, ate dinner with Corwin in the small parlor, and learned the particular skill of not visibly noticing when people noticed her. On the second evening, the king came to the informal dinner instead of the formal one, and when Corwin made a quiet excuse and disappeared, she thought, this is what it will be. The daily texture of it, which is not ceremony or declaration, but the accumulation of evenings and stables and archives and conversations that go until the lamp needs lighting. Whatever the panel decides, he said, which was the beginning of something but also the whole of it, because she put her hand over his on the table before he could finish, and he stopped and looked at her and she said, "I know." He turned his hand over. "I should have." He stopped again. "You were very careful," she said. "I am always very careful," he said. "It has been a useful trait, and also an occasionally excessive one." "You are being careful right now," she observed. "I am trying to be less," he said. She smiled at him, and it was the smile. She had not yet given him the real one, the unguarded version of it, the one that she had been keeping behind the careful version while she was still deciding if this was safe. Something happened to his face when he saw it. Not much. He was very controlled. But something happened, and she saw it. And she thought, I will learn all of these. I will learn every small thing that is allowed through the control, and I will know them all like I know the tell of an animal that is trying not to show. That it is happy to see you. The panel announced its finding on the morning of the 4th day, in a session that was open to the full court. The senior panelist read the ruling in the formal language of legal proceedings, which was dense and precise, and took 15 minutes to convey what was, in summary, this. The ancestral law was valid and had not been superseded by practice. The Ravenkeeper line was confirmed as Lyra's by documented genealogical record and the corroborating evidence of the token, the name, and the testimony of the archive documents. The bond seat claim was legally recognized as requiring formal consideration before any other arrangement could proceed. The binding ceremony was officially suspended pending completion of the formal recognition process. Vivian sat through the reading with her eyes forward and her face composed. Lyra watched her see the precise moment that 3 years of work had to be reclassified, and watched her reclassify it with the controlled adjustment of a person who has too much discipline to be seen coming apart. She gathered her things and left the chamber with every inch of her dignity intact, and 3 of her allies left with her, and 4 did not. And that was the arithmetic of the day. Corwin was incandescent with satisfaction, which he expressed through the medium of being extremely professional about it, his face entirely neutral, and his eyes doing the thing where they were doing everything his face was not. He turned to Lyra and said, with the precision of a man who has never in his life said more than was necessary. "Well done." "I did not do anything," she said. "You stayed," he said. "When leaving would have been easier. That counts." The recognition ceremony was set for the full moon. It was not the binding ceremony, not yet, because the formal bond required both participants to come to it freely and in full knowledge, and there were things still to be discussed and decided and understood. But it was the public moment when her lineage would be formally acknowledged, when she would be recognized before the court as the last of the Ravenkeeper line, when 300 years of a family being buried in footnotes would be restored to the front of the book. She spent the week before it in the archives, not because she needed to research anything more, but because she needed to be with the documents, with the physical fact of the history she was being given back, the names and records and small details, of a line of people who had existed and mattered and been made to disappear, and who were, through her, going to exist and matter again. She also, in this week, had a conversation with Lady Vivian that she had not entirely planned. They encountered each other in the corridor outside the archives late in the evening, when the palace was settling toward sleep and people were more themselves, and they stopped, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. The panel ruling was correct, Vivian said finally. It cost her something to say it. Lyra could see that clearly, but it was said without softening or qualification, with the directness of a person who has decided that this is what honesty requires of her in this moment. The law is the law, and the evidence was clear. I do not have to be happy about it to acknowledge that. I know, Lyra said. I want you to understand, Vivian said, and her voice was different from the garden tea voice, less curated, more direct, that it was never personal. You were not a person to me, initially. You were a disruption. I am. She paused. I am capable of making that distinction, but I am not certain it reflects particularly well on me. Lyra thought about this for a moment. You were trying to secure something important to you, she said. I would have done the same. I did do the same, in a smaller way, staying rather than leaving. We were both just trying to keep what was ours. Something moved through Vivian's expression. Quickly, the specific look of someone who has been given more grace than they expected, and does not entirely know what to do with it. You are more generous than I would be, she said. I grew up with animals, Lyra said. It teaches you that most things that seem aggressive are actually afraid. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. Something settled in her face. I intend to remain at court, she said. On my own terms, with my own alliances, not as an enemy. I would prefer that, Lyra said. They parted in the corridor without any further ceremony, and Lyra walked back to her room with the particular lightness of a day that has resolved something that had been heavy. The raven was on the windowsill, and it made the satisfied sound it sometimes made when she had done something right, and she told it to be quiet, and it ignored her completely, which was their normal dynamic. And she went to sleep with the token warm against her chest, and the ring on the small table beside her. Bed, where it pulsed all night, with its old, slow light. The night of the recognition ceremony, she stood in front of the mirror in the dress Corwin had procured for her, a deep gray that was close to the color of the king's eyes in certain lights, simple and well-made, and looked at her own face and thought about her father. She thought about the small boy who had come south with a carved token and a secret name and a family's worth of old knowledge hidden in lullabies, who had made himself ordinary so thoroughly that his own daughter had not known she was anything else, who had put all of it inside her and trusted her to carry it forward. She put her fingers on the token at her throat and said quietly to the room, I know you would have been afraid for me. I know you would have wanted me safe. But I think this is what safe looks like, actually. I think this is what you were keeping it for. The raven made a sound from the windowsill. She turned and looked at it. You knew, she said. You have always known. It regarded her with one glossy black eye, and the patient certainty of a creature that has been waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "All right," she said. "Let us go." The great hall had been used for ceremonies for 600 years, and it had the particular weight of a place that has absorbed history until history is part of its walls. Torches burned in lines along the stone, and the air smelled of wax and wood smoke, and many people holding their breath. Lyra walked through the doors and felt every eye in the room and kept walking, because you could not stop and you could not look down. You had to walk through the middle of being seen and trust that you were solid enough to survive it. She was. She was surprised to find that she was. The king stood at the dais in his formal blacks, and when she reached the foot of the steps and looked up at him, he was looking back at her with the full weight of his attention and the particular quality of his eyes that she had been learning for weeks, the open version, the one where he was not managing himself, and she thought, there it is. There is the person behind the institution. He was there the whole time, and she had been learning him like she learned an animal that needed patience, and she was glad she had been patient. Aldrich, the steward, read the formal words of the recognition, the legal language that confirmed her lineage and her name, and her right to the title that had not been used in 300 years. The Raven Keeper of Ashenvale, the last of her line, the one the raven had come to. As he read, the raven itself flew through the high windows of the hall, which were open to the night sky, and circled the room once in the silence of its enormous wings, and then settled, not on the obsidian perch, not on her shoulder, but at the precise center of the dais, between where she stood and where the king stood, equidistant, present, its black feathers lit by the torchlight so that they gleamed with that not silver, not gold color that she had come to understand was something older than either. "Lyra Voss," the king said, when the formal words were done, and his voice was his public voice, but with something in it that it did not normally have in public, something that made a few of the assembled nobles look at each other with the expressions of people recalibrating very quickly. "Lyra of the Ravenkeeper line, the court of Ashenvale acknowledges your lineage and your right." He paused. "And I, as your king and as..." Another pause, smaller, as something I am still learning the right word for. "I acknowledge what you have brought back to this court, what your family kept for 300 years, what you carried without knowing you were carrying it." He descended the steps and came to stand before her, and he held out his hand, and on his palm was the ring, the sovereignty ring of Ashenvale, the one that had started all of this. "The ring was brought to you," he said, quiet enough that it was mostly for her, and only incidentally for the room. "I am asking you to give it back, freely, as a choice." She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She looked at the raven between them and the assembled court, and the torchlight, and the 600 years of history in the walls of this room. And she thought of everything her father had kept safe in lullabies and a carved token, and 4 letters of a name. And she took the ring from his palm, and held it for a moment in both of her hands, feeling the pulse of it one last time against her skin. And then she placed it on his finger. The sound the room made was not quite applause, and not quite a collective exhale, but something between the two. The sound of a story finding the shape it had been reaching for. "There is no right word yet," she told him quietly, "but we have time to find it." The raven made its satisfied sound. The ring pulsed once, bright, and then settled into its steady rhythm. And the king of Ashenvale, who had spent his life learning to contain himself within the architecture of duty and governance and careful restraint, looked at the woman who talked to horses and carried her heritage in lullabies, and smiled properly, the full, unguarded version of it, and it was the most sovereign thing she had ever seen him do. The weeks that followed the recognition ceremony were not the end of anything. That was the thing she had not anticipated, that the story did not stop at the point where it should have been finished, but continued into the ordinary particular days of what came after, and that the ordinary days were their own kind of remarkable. She learned the palace in a different way now, not as someone who was passing through it or surviving it, but as someone who was part of it, and she learned the court in the way you learn a large, complicated animal, with patience and attention, and the understanding that there will always be something new to notice. Corwin became the friend he had announced himself as from the beginning, with the easy certainty of someone who has always known exactly how they feel about people, and does not see the point of pretending otherwise. The stable hands who had watched her with the careful blankness of people who did not know what to make of her became colleagues in the way that people do when you show up reliably and do the work alongside them. And Ash the horse allowed 2 of them to brush him, which Lyra considered one of her more significant accomplishments. Lady Vivian remained at court. She was, as she had promised, not an enemy. She was also not a friend. But she was something that Lyra had not had a word for until Corwin supplied one. A professional. Someone who operated in the same space you did with mutual recognition of capability and the particular respect that came from 2 people who had seen each other at their most strategic and had decided that the field was big enough. Vivian threw herself into the trade alliance negotiations that had been stalled for 2 years and turned out to be extraordinarily good at them, which Lyra reported to Corwin, who reported it to the king, who said, with the dry precision that she was learning to love in him, that he had always known she would be more useful as an ally than as a consort, and that the situation had worked out rather well on that front. The binding ceremony, when it came, was planned differently from the one that had been interrupted, built around what both of them actually were rather than the political architecture of what they were supposed to be. There was the sacred circle and the old words and the raven and the particular quality of moonlight on the full moon, and there was Cale, who stood in the circle without his face carefully composed into neutrality. But let her see him, the complicated and controlled and quietly feeling person who had been navigating by duty so long. He had half forgotten there was something else to navigate by. She stood across the circle from him with the token at her throat, and the Ravenkeeper's title new on her tongue, and the song her father had taught her running quietly through her head. The words she now understood, the oath she had been carrying since childhood. She had not planned to say it aloud. But when the old words of the ceremony created the silence that called for something to fill it, she began to sing it, low, in the old language, the language of the northern territories, the oath that her father had turned into a lullaby and that she had carried into this moment without knowing it was leading here. She felt him go still across the circle in the way that he went still when something had gotten through to him. She felt the raven stir. She felt the bond seat pulse with the same rhythm as the ring on his finger and the token at her throat. When she finished, the silence was of the kind that happens after music, the kind that holds the shape of what was. In it, he crossed the circle in 3 steps and put his hands on her face with the particular gentleness of someone who has spent a long time being very careful with things and has decided to trust himself now with this. And she put her hands over his and looked at him and thought, there it is. There's the feeling she had been afraid to want because she had not known she was allowed to want something this large. She had been allowed to want it all along. The raven had known. Her father had known or hoped or prepared her for the possibility. She had been the last person to understand, which seemed, in retrospect, entirely consistent with how she moved through the world, slow and attentive, and arriving late to the knowing but solid once she got there. I have the word, he said quietly, with the small, precise smile she had learned to watch for. Tell me, she said. He told her. It was not a title or a legal category or anything that would have appeared in the formal records of the recognition ceremony. It was just a word. His word. The one he had found in the ordinary particular days of the past weeks, in evenings in the archive, and mornings in the stables and dinners where they had talked until the lamp needed lighting. She thought her father would have approved of it. She thought the raven approved of it, because the raven made the satisfied sound and turned to face the night sky and spread its enormous wings once without lifting off, a gesture she had come to, recognize as its version of applause. She kissed him first. She had decided on this privately, some days before, because he was careful by nature, and she understood careful things. And sometimes the kindest thing you could do for a careful thing was to make the first move, so it did not have to weigh the decision against every other variable. He was very still, for exactly 1 second, and then he was not still at all. And the moonlight lay silver and warm across the sacred circle, and the raven watched the night, and the bond settled into place like something that had been waiting to be allowed to exist, and the whole packed weight of 300 years of a kept faith found its resolution in the simplest possible form. The court recognized a shift in the axis of things when they returned to the hall together. There was a stillness, followed by something more celebratory, and Corwin, standing near the door with his notebook under his arm, and the expression of a man who has correctly predicted the outcome of his research, caught her eye and nodded once. "Well done," he said, which she was beginning to understand was his highest compliment. "I stayed," she said. "You did more than that," he said. She wore the token still. She would always wear it. Not because she needed to remember who she was anymore, but because she wanted to carry him with her, the careful, quiet man who had come south with everything that mattered, hidden in the things that seemed most ordinary, and who had given her, without her knowing, the exact inheritance she needed to become exactly this. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming?